They said a woman had no place in a battlefield, no chance of matching the grit of a Navy SEAL. But when bullets rained down in a burning desert and the commander of one of America's most elite units lay bleeding on the sand, it wasn't another SEAL who saved him. It was her. This is not just a war story. It's a story of courage, sacrifice, betrayal, and a love that was tested by fire before it ever reached the altar. If you believe courage comes in unexpected forms, then stick around. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because stories like this remind us why we fight, why we hope, and why love always finds a way. The desert burned beneath a merciless sun, the air thick with the scent of fire, smoke, and blood, as a Navy SEAL unit pushed deeper into hostile ground. Their mission clear, but their path suddenly swallowed by chaos when an ambush shattered the silence with a thunderous explosion that ripped armored vehicles apart and filled the valley with black smoke and gunfire. And in the heart of that storm, the SEAL commander, a man whose authority and reputation were forged in countless missions, was struck by a sniper's bullet and fell to the sand bleeding and broken, his men stunned by the sight of their leader collapsing under the weight of war. Yet in that desperate moment, when logic said he would be lost, she appeared, a combat medic attached to the mission, unnoticed until her courage blazed brighter than the fire around them, sprinting through bullets and explosions to reach him, pressing her trembling yet steady hands against the wound, fighting to keep his life from slipping away while the battlefield roared around her, and though his eyes pleaded with her to leave him, to save herself, she refused, working with skill and desperation, rapping, pressing, whispering silent defiance into the air as bullets tore the sand beside her until she realized saving him required more than stopping the bleeding. It required moving him. And though his body weighed like steel and stone, she hoisted him onto her shoulders, her frame buckling under his armored weight, yet rising again with a will that defied reason, carrying him step by step through fire and dust as her comrades unleashed cover, fire to shield her. Their own spirits reignited by the sight of one woman refusing to let death claim their commander, stumbling and falling yet never surrendering her grip, dragging him when her legs threatened to collapse, fighting inch by inch until she reached the wreckage of a burning vehicle that gave just enough cover to lower him down and keep working on his wounds with hands now soaked in his blood, her chest heaving as exhaustion clawed at her body, but her mind refusing to quit until reinforcements broke through and the enemy was pushed back, leaving behind silence and ruin, but also a story none of them would ever forget. The story of a medic who carried a commander through hell, who saved not just a man, but the will of every soldier who witnessed her defiance. And when helicopters finally lifted him away, clinging to life, and she collapsed beside the wreckage, battered but unbroken, none of them could know that what had been written in blood that day would one day become more than legend, for she had saved the SEAL commander's life in war, and years later, long after the scars had healed, he would walk beside her down the aisle, bound not by battle but by love. Though before that day would come, both of them would face trials fiercer than any ambush, betrayals deeper than any wound, and storms that would test them far beyond the battlefield. When the guns went silent and the dust of the battlefield settled into memory, life for her and the SEAL commander fractured into two very different worlds. For though she had saved him and carried him through fire, once the helicopters lifted them out and hospitals swallowed him into months of recovery, the military machine moved forward without pause. New missions demanded, new wars rising like endless waves, and she returned to her base with medals pinned to her chest and whispers of legend trailing behind her, but also with an emptiness that no ceremony could fill, because the truth was that the bond forged on that burning day was deeper than any recognition. Yet they were pulled apart by distance, duty, and silence, as he lay in sterile hospital rooms, learning how to breathe again without pain, learning how to walk again with scars that ached in both flesh and memory, and she struggled with her own demons, nightmares that woke her in the dead of night with echoes of explosions and the unbearable weight of his bleeding body across her shoulders. And though letters and emails were exchanged at first, clipped updates written with the formality of warriors too afraid to admit the rawness inside them, those words faded into fewer and fewer messages until only silence remained. Yet the silence was not emptiness, but a heavy, unspoken thread that connected them across time and oceans. As he was promoted, honored, and sent back into the shadows of classified missions, and she was reassigned to different units, her skill as a medic sought after in dangerous corners of the world, and in each new place she carried with her the memory of the commander's eyes when they flickered open on that battlefield, the silent plea he had given. The weight of his survival pressed into her soul, while he in turn carried with him the image of her defiance, her strength, the burning truth that no man had saved him but her, and yet neither dared to confront what it meant, burying it under the demands of service, the loyalty to their country, and the fear of a bond that might fracture under reality. But destiny is never patient, and years later, when their paths crossed again, it was not in the safe glow of peace, but in the shadow of betrayal. For by then the world had changed, enemies had grown bolder, alliances weaker, and somewhere deep in the machinery of power, someone had chosen to use her courage against her, drawing her into a conspiracy she could not see, while he, scarred but stronger, was sent to investigate whispers of a traitor within their own, and the threads of their lives that had stretched apart so painfully began to tighten again, pulling them toward a reunion that would not be gentle or easy, but fiery, dangerous, and filled with truths that neither of them were ready to face. For saving a man in war had been one battle, but facing him again in a world where both love and betrayal carried equal weight would demand more than either of them had ever given before. Years had passed since the battlefield, where blood and fire had bound their fates, and though both had walked different roads, destiny brought them back together in the most unexpected and dangerous way, for he had risen in rank and reputation, carrying the scars of survival like silent medals on his body. A commander whose very presence commanded obedience, while she had become sharper, stronger, her name whispered across units as the medic who never let death win. Yet all those years of distance unraveled in a single moment when their eyes met again, not in a place of peace, but in the middle of a covert operation shrouded in secrecy, where betrayal lingered in the air heavier than the smoke of war. For intelligence had revealed a leak within the chain of command, someone feeding the enemy information that cost American lives, and he had been tasked to lead the hunt, unaware that her name would surface in reports twisted by shadows and half-truths, painting her not as the savior she had been, but as a possible traitor. A woman marked by whispers of contacts with the wrong people, unexplained movements, and coded transmissions that made no sense to her but were enough to put her under suspicion. And when they met in that dimly lit base, the clash of past and present was violent, the weight of memory colliding with the brutality of duty. For he was torn between the woman who had once carried him from death's grip and the commander responsible for finding the source of betrayal, and she stood before him with fire in her eyes, broken by the thought that the man whose life she had saved could ever believe she was capable of treachery. Yet the war they had stepped into was no longer just against a visible enemy, but against shadows within, and soon both realized they were pawns in a larger game, hunted by unseen forces that thrived on turning loyalty into doubt, forcing them into hiding, into running, into fighting side by side once again, not as commander and medic, but as fugitives bound by trust that had to be reforged under fire, chased through deserts, mountains, and cities where every alley could hide an assassin and every message could be a trap. And in that crucible of suspicion and danger, the truth of their bond began to surface, no longer hidden under years of silence, but raw and undeniable. Yet even as feelings long buried pushed toward the surface, a twist of fate cut through them. Like a blade, for the very mission designed to expose the traitor revealed that someone within the highest levels of command had orchestrated not just her framing, but the ambush years ago that nearly killed him. And the enemy had not been a faceless shadow across the border, but a hand from within their own walls, meaning the battlefield that nearly claimed his life and gave birth to their bond had been engineered. And now, with both their lives hanging in the balance, they were forced to accept that the war had always been closer than they imagined, and the only way to survive was together, even as the truth threatened to tear them apart. The storm that had gathered around them reached its fiercest point when the truth of the conspiracy could no longer be denied, when the names hidden in shadows finally revealed themselves, and the enemy was not just across a border, but seated in polished offices, wearing stars and ribbons. Men who had sold out their own for power and gain, and as the SEAL commander and the woman who had once carried him across fire uncovered the last threads. They found themselves hunted not just by enemies but by their own, ambushed in dark streets and abandoned compounds, fighting back with a desperation that carried both the weight of justice and the fury of betrayal, and in those nights when bullets tore through walls and escape seemed impossible, they leaned on each other with a trust no enemy could sever, their bond forged in war, tested in distance, and now sealed in fire once more. And when the final battle came, it was not in the desert, but in the steel corridors of a secret facility, where files and lives were destroyed with equal ease, where she stood beside him with weapons in her hands instead of bandages, where he fought not just for his country, but for the woman who had saved him twice now, once from death and once from the lie that had nearly broken him, and together they brought the traitors down, exposing corruption that had bled into the heart of command. Though it came at a cost, for comrades were lost, scars were deepened, and both of them walked away carrying burdens heavier than before. Yet this time, they walked away together, not into silence, but into a promise that the bond they had ignored for years could no longer be denied. And as months passed, recovery became rebuilding. Rebuilding became living, and living became loving. Until the day arrived when the battlefield was replaced by an aisle lined with flowers, where the air smelled not of smoke, but of hope, where uniforms gave way to address and vows, and the same soldiers who had once watched her carry him through hell now stood as witnesses to something greater than war. And as he took her hand, and they walked together beneath the gaze of friends and family, every scar on their bodies became a testament to survival. Every memory of fire became a foundation for love, and the story that began in the burning desert ended not in sorrow, but in the triumph of a love that defied death, betrayal, and time itself. For she had once saved the SEAL commander's life, and years later, with every step down that aisle, he knew he was the one who had been given the greater gift, her heart, her loyalty, and her forever.